Hey, how's it going everyone? Welcome back to Keeping Fish Simple. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about snails, and in particular, we're going to be talking about pest snails and whether they're good or bad for your aquarium. I'm going to give you guys some of my personal opinions on them, why I love them, why I hate them, and just give you guys the complete rundown with my 8 years of fish keeping experience and continually having snails throughout the whole entire process. So I guess without any further ado, let's get into it. So firstly, let's start off with what are pest snails. Now, I normally don't call these guys pests. A lot of people in the aquarium hobby, especially keepers like Dean from Dean's Fish Room, who's an absolutely amazing fish breeder, that a lot of people like to use as inspiration for their fish breeding fish rooms, doesn't have snails in his entire setup, and I actually kind of admire that because it's very, very clean and tidy. I mean, someone like that probably sees these guys as pests. I personally don't see them as pests. The way I see snails in an aquarium is similar to earthworms in a garden, where you're going to have earthworms down in your soil, and just because they're in there and, you know, they're obviously impacting the soil and they're playing a role in growing your plants, doesn't mean that they're a pest. They can actually be very, very beneficial for your aquarium in the right circumstances. So snails will normally enter the aquarium in a few ways. The first way normally is coming in on plant leaves. So if you buy some plants, there might be some eggs on that leaf, or there might be actually a small little snail. And a lot of these snails that are in our aquariums have both reproductive organs, so they don't actually need two snails, a male and a female, to reproduce. They can literally just reproduce with themselves. So they can come in on a leaf, and you only need one snail, and you've started up a whole entire colony of snails. The other way is sometimes a fish might poop out a snail. That's happened before, and the snail will then turn into a bunch of different snails. Another way is if you bag up fish, and then the fish come with a snail in the bag, something like that. They just get introduced into your aquarium, and then these guys, because they can just reproduce with themselves, can turn themselves into a massive army of snails in your aquarium in no time. Now, there's three common types of snails that I've found in the aquarium hobby to be most common when we're referring to pest snails. Now, the first type, and the type that I'm most familiar with, is the ram's horn snail. Now, there's actually a few different types and species of ram's horn snails that look pretty cool. I've got some of these blue ones that look absolutely magnificent, and I actually enjoy keeping these guys in my aquarium and don't consider them a pest. I've also got red ram's horn snails, I've got brown ram's horn snails, and I've also got these like turtle patterned ones. I don't know what they're called, but ram's horn snails are really common. I've had them in my aquariums for years and years and years, and I mean, there's so many of them in my aquariums at the moment that there's not a lot I'm doing about it. And they lay eggs underneath driftwood, and they'll lay eggs on glass and stuff like that. They can reproduce very quickly. I've noticed that if I keep the blues of some of my other species, the other species will actually reproduce quicker than the blues, so that's an interesting observation. But these guys will go along the glass of your tank, and they'll go on pieces of driftwood and on plant leaves and stuff like that. They won't go into the substrate. They'll just stay on the surfaces of things in the aquarium. And if you throw some food in the aquarium, they'll also jump on top of that eventually. And the reason they're called ram's horn snails is because they literally have these like cool ram's horn kind of stems sticking out of their head, which I think's their eyes. I've never really gotten too close to look at them. And they look like little rams running around. So in my opinion, they're pretty cool, but that's the first type. Now, the second common type of snail that we'll find in our aquariums is Malaysian trumpet snails. Now, these snails get their name because they kind of look like a trumpet. I don't really know. I don't see it, but they have that like coniferous shape. And these guys are a little bit different to the ram's horns, where they'll actually bury themselves in the substrate, especially if you have like a sand substrate. They'll bury themselves in there. Now, these guys are a heavily nocturnal snail. The ram's horn snails are also nocturnal. But the reason I'm mentioning that they're nocturnal is because you won't notice how many of these you have in an aquarium until you come in at night and see them all up along the glass. Because of the fact that they're in the substrate, you don't actually see these snails running around the aquarium until you turn the lights off and they come out and feel comfortable because they're nocturnal. So these snails are actually pretty good for a lot of aquariums. I mean, they do disrupt the substrate, but they're really good for that turnover of the substrate. And these guys will actually go through the substrate like earthworms and help decompose certain things in the tank. So commonly you won't see these guys out of the substrate. They won't be on like ornaments and stuff. They might, but for the most part, they'll be in the substrate. I don't see a lot of these guys in my grow out tanks because I don't have that substrate. I'll see a few here and there, but they won't be able to reproduce well. And those are the tanks with the ram's horn snails in them. Now, this brings me on to the third most common type of snail that I've seen in the aquarium, which is bladder snails. Now, I really don't like bladder snails that much. There's no good reason why I don't like them. They're pretty similar to the ram's horn snails. The only reason I don't like them is because I think they're ugly. That's just me being savage, but I just don't like these guys. Basically, the exact same as the ram's horn snail, just looks ugly, isn't cute. I personally don't know a lot about them. I definitely have them in my aquariums, but the ram's horn snails outcompete them for food. And yeah, I just kind of hate bladder snails, so yeah. So I guess with all this talk about snails and no real information on them, you're all probably thinking, oh my god, I've got so many of these snails in my aquarium. Should I be afraid? And the answer is no. Or maybe. Not really. No, you shouldn't be worried at all. Snails are what we call detritivores in the aquarium, and what that means is they actually help to break down and decompose matter in your aquarium. So dead leaves of plants they'll eat. Now, a lot of people will think that they eat live plants and that they'll be like on a plant and actually eat the plant itself, but I've never seen snails do this. This is a common opinion among many aquascapers and fish keepers. Snails don't eat live plants, they only eat decomposing leaves of plants. So they'll help to break down that organic matter of the decomposing leaves. They'll help to clean up little pieces of food that fish miss. They'll actually even eat fish poop and decompose that again if there's nothing else in the aquarium. So having a good small population that's appropriate of these guys in your aquarium is really beneficial because they'll help to break down everything and really turn your aquarium into an ecosystem. Without them, it's going to take things a lot longer to break down and you'll have to do a lot more manual cleaning yourself. So in a controlled environment, they can actually be very beneficial for making sure your aquarium is running like an ecosystem and doesn't require your hand and your help all the time. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why I like snails a lot. Now, personally, I kind of have a weird relationship with snails where I love them and hate them. And there's a few different reasons. So I like snails for all the reasons I was just telling you, with their help in the aquarium to break down stuff and to turn it into an ecosystem. But I also like them because if you get some of the cool, rarer ones, like the blue ones that I actually have available on my website, and some of the red ones and things like that, you can actually sell these guys and make a little bit of extra money in an aquarium because a lot of people will think that they look cool too, and you'll be able to sell them. So that's another cool thing you can do with your snails. I mean, you can't do this with every single pet snail. Some people won't want them. Another reason why they're good is because if you have like a pufferfish or you have some loaches, these are actually a free food that you can feed to your loaches and feed to your pufferfish without having to go out and buy snails or buy worms and things like that. And they absolutely love eating them. So that's another thing that's good about snails. I'm sure there's a bunch of other things that I'm forgetting, but those are my main reasons that come to my head and some of the reasons why I like snails. Now, why do I hate snails? Well, the first thing I hate about snails is how quickly they reproduce. Snails can really reproduce quickly if you're overfeeding an aquarium, because all that extra food is going to help to sustain a bigger population of snails, rather than if you had no food for the snails, you can only sustain 2 or 3. But if you overfeed, you could sustain like 100, and they can reproduce really quickly. So they're a really good indicator of how much you're overfeeding. Now, I do hate how quickly they can reproduce, but they're pretty easy to remove, and I'll talk about that later on in the video. But that's my first reason. Another reason I hate them is they will compete for food. So if you have a lot of them in an aquarium, and you have like a zucchini in there to try and feed some baby bristlenose, they'll attach to the zucchini and then the baby bristlenose won't be able to eat the zucchini, so that's pretty annoying. They will compete for food for like your bottom feeders, so Corydoras and bristlenose and things like that. So that's why you need to really stay on top of your populations in those aquariums. Another reason I hate them too is they eat eggs. So eggs in like spawning mops, eggs on tiles from, different fish, they will eat those eggs, and man, I hate that. Like, that is the most annoying thing. So that's why in your breeding tanks as well, you got to really stay on top of your populations, because otherwise you'll spend all this time trying to breed fish and the snails will just treat it as caviar. It's just super annoying, so I hate that. Another reason I hate them that doesn't bother me too much, but this will bother a lot of people who have beautiful aquascapes, is they can clog equipment. They can climb into your equipment and clog it up and stop that propeller from working and turn off your nice little canister filter. They can also do that. And I guess another reason is that they are dirty. Like, they will add to the bioload of your aquarium and can foul up the water pretty quick. So if you have too many of these guys in a grow out tank, you should probably remove them, because they are contributing to the waste produced in that tank, and they're probably going to stunt your fish if you're not careful and you have too many in there. I've done that before. So I guess the takeaways with snails that I can give you is they're good for all the reasons I've explained. They're bad for all the reasons I've explained. And you should really treat them as an indicator for how much you're feeding in the aquarium and how much you should be cleaning. Because if you clean your aquarium too, and you take all those leaves out, they're not going to have anything to eat, and then they won't be able to reproduce and have as many babies. So they're a real good indicator of how much cleaning you're doing. If you're doing a lot of manual cleaning, you'll actually be able to take these guys out yourself and, remove them yourself. If you're not doing a lot of cleaning and you're doing a lot of overfeeding, you're just going to be breeding snails and have a ton of them in there. So that's why you have a lot of snails maybe. But I'm going to quickly tell you guys some of the ways to remove them from your aquarium, and I don't have any magical cures. So a lot of these methods are going to be laborious, but the first method is adding copper to your tank. I definitely do not recommend this. Some people have done it and they'll add copper and it'll kill all the snails, but a thing they don't know is it also kills shrimp, it can kill sensitive fish, and copper will actually stay in the silicon of your tank. And I've had people come to me and tell me that they've bought a tank and they can't keep shrimp. And if it's a secondhand tank, someone might have added copper to that tank and it's actually stayed in the silicon and it's killed shrimp years after it being added. So don't add copper to your tank unless you only plan on breeding one fish in there forever and don't plan on selling it to someone else. The second method that I've seen lots of people do is create like a plastic bottle and add fish food or some kind of like food bait into the plastic bottle and then catch the snails that way. But that method doesn't work too well because you'll actually end up just catching fish in there too, and it's just a little bit annoying to make. I couldn't be bothered doing that. My favorite method is to add some kind of bait in there and then just catch them out with my hands. So what I mean by bait is like a piece of zucchini on a fork, or even a carrot on a fork is okay because then you're not going to attract bristlenose. But adding one of those two on a fork into your tank, all the snails will come to it after about an hour to 2 hours, and then you can just fish that out, toss the snails out in the garden, do whatever you want with them, feed them to some fish. I've even crushed them up before and fed them back to the fish. So that's another good way to remove them. I'm sure there's other ways to remove them. You can add like a predator to your tank, so you can buy like a loach, like a little Pakistani loach. I think they're also called yo-yo loaches. You can add those to your tank. You can add a little pea puffer to your tank. That'll help keep the population down. So that's another way you can remove them. But that's pretty much everything I know about snails. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys learned something about them. I hope you're not afraid of them anymore. And I'll see you guys in the next one.